Hey everyone, welcome to the world of 3D and Blender. Blender is the open source software we'll be using to make this illustration today, and my goal is to show you how easy it is to pick it up and create even though simple but beautiful illustration that you can use for your designs and artworks. Blender gained a lot of popularity lately, and even professionals and professional studios are jumping on the Blender trend and starting to use it in their professional workflows. First thing we'll need to do is to go to Blender's website. You can find a link in the description down below and download a copy of Blender. And as you can see here right now is a big button, download Blender 2.91. The first time I did this episode was when the Blender 2.8 beta came out, so I've decided to re-record it and provide this introduction for the newest version of Blender. This doesn't mean that the whole course needs to be reworked. Most of the things that worked in 2.80 work in 2.91 as well. There are some little differences and I keep the course updated, so don't worry about this. And right now, just go ahead, click the download link and you will be redirected to the download page. Click it once again and the download will start for you. After that, you just run the file and it runs the standard installer that you are used to in another software as well. So just install the Blender, launch it, and I will see you there. After launching Blender, you will be welcomed with the splash screen, so just click anywhere to dismiss it. And this is the UI of Blender. If it looks a little bit overwhelming and technical, don't worry about that. I will provide only essential information for you as you go through the project, so you don't need to worry about all the buttons and all the menus you can see. You can just focus on your task and then all the other stuff will come to you naturally after some time. So don't worry about the complexity of the software, and let's have a look what we can do here. So the first thing you can see is this large window. It's called the viewport, and basically this is where all the 3D magic happens. This is where you do all your modeling or animation or what have you. And as the first thing, you need to be able to navigate this viewport so you can see your object from multiple angles, so you can zoom in, zoom out. And here in the top right corner of the viewport, you can see some tools that can be used to navigate it. So first thing, there's this color for gizmo with color coded axis, and you can just click with the left mouse button and drag around to rotate your view, just like that. Of course, it would be a little bit tedious to go there every time you need to rotate your view. So of course, Blender provides shortcuts that we can use to navigate our viewport. And to be able to rotate viewport, you need a 3-button mouse or a mouse that has a clickable scroll wheel. So if you click and hold your third mouse button or scroll wheel, you will see you are able to rotate around your scene just like with the gizmo. If you don't have a third mouse button, or you're working on a laptop, or you have the Apple Magic Mouse, of course, you can work around this. Just go here in the Edit, open Preferences, click the Input tab, and under the mouse section, you will have an option to emulate 3-button mouse. So let's just see what that does. I will just click the emulate 3-button mouse option, and you can just close the preferences. They're already saved. And now if you hold Alt on a keyboard and use the left mouse button, you will see that this works the same way as if we click the middle mouse button. Even the screencast here shows that I'm holding the middle mouse button, even though I'm using the Alt and left mouse button combination. So this way you can easily rotate as well. So let me now go ahead to the preferences and I will deactivate this option. And please just bear in mind that if you enable this option, there are some combinations, some keyboard shortcut combinations in Blender that use Alt key. So you'll lose the option to use some of that default shortcuts. Of course, they can be remapped. I just wanted to mention that there might be a problem sometimes, but if we come across something like this, I will mention it and I will explain how to work around it. So next thing we need to do is to zoom in and out. So I will just use my mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And of course, you can use the UI. There's a magnifying glass icon that you can click and hold and drag to zoom in and out. And there is one more icon for navigating the viewport, and that's this hand icon. If you click and hold, you can pan your view. And if you want to do this with the shortcut, you just hold Shift on the keyboard, hold middle mouse button, and pan your view like this. If you used that mouse emulation, you will always need to hold Alt and then use the other combinations to zoom in and pan. So if you want to zoom in, you will hold Alt and Control and click and drag. And if you want to pan, you will hold Alt, Shift and drag around. So that's the way how you can navigate your viewport. And the next thing you need to do is to be able to select your objects. And this is pretty straightforward. You just left click some object or the light or camera and it will select. And if you need to deselect it, just click anywhere. So this works pretty much as any other software or as you would expect it to. And once more regarding the viewport navigation, sometimes you might feel you got lost, like if you pan too far or you lose your center of rotation or something, you need to go back to your object. There's a simple shortcut that you can use that will recenter your view on your object, and that's the period on a numpad. So you just press the period next to the 0 and you will recenter your view on your object. And again, if you don't have a keyboard with numpad or you are working on a laptop without the numpad, there's a replacement for this, and you can use the tilde key to quickly access some viewing options. And it's the key next to the one on your keyboard right above the tab. So hold the tilde key and you will get options like this. And if you go over the view selected and release, you will center your view on your object. So this is just a simple shortcut tip that if you get lost, you can quickly get back to your object. Let me now zoom out a little bit. And the last thing you need to know is, of course, be able to move your objects around your scene, to rotate them, to make them larger or smaller. And for this, we can use simple transformation tool. They're located right here on the left side of the viewport. If you don't see this toolbar here, if for some reason it got hidden, you can always display it with the T on a keyboard or hide it if it gets in the way. So here you can see some basic transformation options and some basic functions. And the first thing you can see here is the move tool. So if you click the move tool, you will see these color-coded arrows appear that correspond to their respective color-coded axis. So you can see on the x-axis, that's red, we have a red arrow, and if you click and hold, you can drag your object along that axis. And the same applies for the other ones. There are these little squares. They are basically enabling you to move on two axes at once. So if you click and hold the blue one, you will move just on X and Y plane and stuff like that. So this is pretty straightforward. If you want more freedom in movement, you can just click and hold the white circle and it will allow you to move according to your camera position. So the next one will be rotation, and again this is pretty straightforward. You can just click and drag these circles to rotate around some axis, and the same will apply for scaling, where you can just activate this and scale your object, for example, by clicking and dragging the red scaling tool on the x-axis or y-axis. So these are the separate transform tools, and there's a fourth one here that's just said transform, and it kind of combines all of these together. So you have these arrows for movement, circles for rotation, and squares for scaling, so you can quickly access these functions. I don't use this gizmo too much, but I wanted to show you because it's basically easiest way how to be able to manipulate your objects without knowing all the shortcuts. So right now you know the viewport, you are able to navigate it with the UI or your mouse shortcuts, and you are able to switch between the transform, select and deselect objects, and move them, scale them, and rotate them around. So let's now zoom out a little bit. I want to go back to the default state of the scene with just the default cube in place. So if you went through some of these transformation, experimented a little bit, you can just start up a new file right now. So as I said before, this is called the default scene, and later you will be able to change your default scene. If you don't like to have a light or camera present when the Blender starts up, you can remove them, of course. But right now we'll work with the factory settings, and we'll actually use this default cube to create something out of it, and we'll use it to create that sushi piece that you've seen on the illustration in the beginning. Let's select the cube, and to be able to modify this, we'll need to go into a different mode. Right now we are in the object mode, as it's indicated right here in the top left corner. You can see the object mode, and it's a drop down that you can actually click and choose from some of the other modes that the Blender offers for manipulating the objects, and one of them that we are interested in right now is the edit mode. So let's select this one. And you will see after entering edit mode, you will see the active mode changed here. The toolbar on the left changed as well. We have now different tools for object manipulation and editing. And you can see by default the cube lighted up, so these parts of the cube are selected. And let's break it down a little bit what we can see here. You can see there are these little dots and lines, and in the 3D terminology these dots are called vertices. One of them is called vertex, and these lines that connect these vertices are called edges. And together the vertices and edges form something called faces, which are these large surfaces. They are sometimes called polygons as well. And these are all building blocks of 3D objects, and that applies for every software out there. And to be able to manipulate them, you have to be able to select them separately. And right now we are in the vertex select mode, so that's indicated right here next to the mode. And you can see this little dot here, so you can click and select different vertices you can see. And now if you switch this to the edge select mode, you are able to select these edges. And the same applies for faces. If you go to the face select mode, you are able to select whole faces or polygons. And if we now want to make that sushi piece out of this cube, we need to scale it down a little bit on the z-axis. So we need to lower its height. So I will now switch to the vertex select mode, and while in the edit mode, we'll now just scale everything down, but we can just drag a selection around all of these vertices, because if we now rotate, you can see in the back this one vertex didn't get selected. So if it's occluded, if you can't see it behind the object, that means it won't get selected by dragging selection around. So let me click away, and to be able to successfully select all of it, we just need to press A to select all. It's a very simple command, and you can now see everything is selected. There are two ways how we can do this. You might recognize these transform tools from the object mode as well. So you can use the scale tool and just click and drag the blue square and scale it on the z-axis. And that's one way to do things. And the way it works, you click, drag, release, and you have scaled. Let me go back. I want to show you a little bit different approach. So let me go back to the select box. And I use a lot of shortcuts. Blender can be really fast and efficient if you learn all the shortcuts. And there are three simple shortcuts for object manipulation. It's G for movement or grabbing, then it's R for rotation, and S for scale. So if you press S, you will enter a different kind of mode. Before you needed to click and drag your mouse to be able to scale. Now you just press S and you enter this kind of interactive mode where you just move your mouse. You don't need to hold or drag anything, and the cube just scales. And the great thing about this interactive mode, it allows you to add some of these commands. So now if we press Z additionally after S, it will lock our scale on the Z-axis, and we can move with the mouse like this and scale it down. And I want to scale it down somewhere here, so you can repeat after me. Just select all with A, press S to scale, and Z to lock it on the Z-axis and scale it like this. And now you just left click to confirm. And I really like to use it this way because I think this interactive mode offers a little bit higher precision than clicking and dragging. And I will now check our reference to see what we are creating. And you can see we need to be able to create this hole in the middle. So let's go back to our cube. And to be able to do that, we need more geometry. We need more of these vertices here, more faces, more polygons, to be able to form this in some kind of shape. And to add geometry, you can just right click to create something called context menu. And here you will find something called Subdivide. So click it once and you will see it basically split your cube into a series of smaller cubes. There are these new vertices created, one here in the middle, but this is still not enough. So I will right click once more and click Subdivide once again. So this is more like it. Right now we can switch to the face select, and of course you can do it with the icons here, but you can use 1, 2 and 3 number keys on your keyboard to switch between these modes. So I will now switch to the face select, and you can see we have these 4 faces here at the top. That's something we need to be able to create that hole in the middle. And so far you saw how you can select the vertices and faces one by one, but if you want to select more of them, you can hold shift to add to the selection. So let's click this face right here, hold shift on the keyboard and left click to add to your selection. And we now have the selection we need to create the hole. Right now, let's press Ctrl S to save. Don't forget to save your files and don't forget to save often. We'll now proceed and create that hole, and we'll use one of the tools right here on the left, and that's the extrude tool. So let's navigate here, and you can see there's the extrude region. So you can just click this and you will see a little gizmo appeared. There's this little plus icon. Don't repeat this after me. I will just show you how you can click and hold the plus icon to drag and extrude some region. I will now go back. But again, there is a simpler way to do this, because again, this is click and drag, and we can use that interactive mode here as well. So without switching from the select box whatsoever, you can just press E on a keyboard to activate this extrude tool. So do that right now and drag it down like this, and left click to confirm. And now to give this a little bit more structure, we can select these 3 faces. So hold shift again and click these 3 faces. Let's rotate a little bit with the middle mouse button, and let's press E again and extrude down like this. So we have a little bit more of the geometry there. And let's now check our reference once again, and we can see we need to create this kind of seaweed. So let's do that right now. And to be able to do that, we need to select all of these faces on the sides and extrude them out a little bit. And you can of course go ahead and select all of these faces by holding shift, but that will be a little bit tedious. You would need to rotate around your objects. And these series of connected faces are called loops. So let's hold Alt key and left click right here to select the face loop all around. And this is one point where you might run into trouble if you're using the mouse emulation. So let's see how we can deal with that. I've went and enable emulate 3-button mouse. So right now, if I hold Alt, I'm able to rotate the view, but I'm not able to Alt click the loop. So to be able to select the loop, you just double click. And here you can see how you can select the direction of the loop by clicking on the side of the face you want the loop to go. So if you double click towards the top, you will select this loop, and vice versa. So I will now deactivate the emulation, and right now I'm able to select this by holding Alt key, and same shortcuts as before apply. So now if we hold shift that we used to add faces to the selection, we can now hold shift Alt and click here to add another loop, and let's add the other ones as well. And this way we were able to select these face loops all around our objects. And again, if you're using the emulation, you can hold shift and double click these loops. Right now we need to extrude this, but if you just press E and start to extrude, you will see this goes into just one direction, and you need to be able to go outside of these faces. So let me cancel this with either escape or right click on a mouse. But be careful right now, we need to press Ctrl Z now, because after canceling the extrusion, we didn't cancel the whole operation. We just released the newly created geometry on the same place as the geometry before. So there is now double vertices in place, and we need to clean that up because that might cause a lot of trouble later. So let's press Ctrl Z, and you will see how this changed a little bit here, and now our geometry is clean. And let's explore our extrude tool here in the toolbar. So you can see this little arrow here. That means that when you click and hold on the tool, there are some additional options, and there are some additional extrusion options, and we are right now interested in extrude along normals. So let's release the button right there, the tool changed and you can see this gizmo right here. But before we proceed, I want to talk a little bit about normals and what that actually means. So if I go here to the overlay settings and enable normals right there, you are able to see these blue lines in the center of every face, and they basically just show the direction of the face. So if we now use the tool extrude along normals, that means that every face will be extruded in the direction of their normal, which is what we want because we want to extrude them outside. And you can of course click and drag this gizmo right here to do the extrusion, but I will switch back to the select box and use the keyboard shortcuts. And instead of E, I will just press Alt E to pop up this menu, and here are the same options for the tool, and we can click extrude faces along normals. And right now we entered again this interactive mode. We are able to drag the mouse and extrude our faces. And you can see how they're extruded in this kind of rounded way. So if you like it, you can extrude it like this, but I really want to keep that boxy style. So I will press additionally S to enable even thickness. And if you focus on the top left side of the viewport, you will see a text line which says which tool are you actually using, and these additional options as well. And if I press S once again, you can see how the even thickness switched off, and again to switch on. So these can be nice reminders of shortcuts for these different tools when you're in this interactive tool mode. So let's just extrude this like that and left click to confirm. And now only thing left to do is to select another loop right here. So I will alt click this diagonal edge right there to select this top loop, press E and extrude this up. Left click, and I will switch off these overlays, and don't forget to save. So your first 3D model is ready now, and we need to give it some color, or I would rather say material, because that's how you need to assign colors in Blender. You need to create the material, and the material is basically a set of properties that define what material is this object made of and how it would behave in a real world. So right now we can go here to the material tab, this red icon right there, and we can see there is already one material assigned here. That's because we created this object from the default cube and it already had some default material. If you would create a whole new object, this wouldn't be here. So let me just tab out of the edit mode and I will quickly remove this material so you can see how this works when you don't have any material assigned. So let's just go back in. And this is what you would see normally when you create a new object, and you can see there's a new button, and if you click it, you create a new material, and you can double click it to rename it. So let's call this rice. And first I want to create the rice material for the sushi. So we'll leave all of these settings alone. We're just interested in the base color here. So let's just click the color and choose something with a little bit of a warmer tone, but be careful not to switch the subsurface color. You need to go to the base color here, and let's just move this a little bit towards the orange like this. Okay, and we changed the color, but nothing changed in the viewport. And to be able to see the actual material, we'll need to switch the view mode, and this is a good place to talk about view modes. So there are 4 of them. You can see these icons right here in the corner, and the first one is the wireframe view, where you just see the structure of your model. And then the second one is the solid view, and that's the one we've worked with so far. And the rest are material preview and render preview. If you switch to the material preview, you will see the color change to our material. And basically you need to be in this mode to see the actual look of your material. And the other one is basically self-explanatory. It allows you to preview your render settings and how your final output would like. So that's something for later. So switch to the material preview, and later in the course you might hear me refer to it as a look dev mode, because that's how it was called in the beta version of Blender when the rest of the course was recorded. So that's just a side note so it doesn't get confusing. The look dev mode and material preview mode is the same. And now what we need to do is to add some more material to this object. We want to give it some more colors. We want to color these like a fish pieces inside and stuff like that. So we'll need to create more materials, and it's really easy to assign multiple materials to a single object. There's something called material slots, and that's the list you can see right here. And you can add additional material slots by clicking the plus button. So let's do that right now. And with this new material slot active, you can click new and create a new material. Let's call this salmon. And we want to give it kind of orange and pink color, something like this. Okay. And we need to assign it to a certain part of our geometry, and you can do that by selecting something you want to color. So let's select this face right here, and let's hold shift and additionally select these faces right here, and we'll click the salmon material here in the material list and click assign. That will assign our material to only those faces we had selected. So now if you click away, you can see this is colored properly. And let's do some more right now. So I will create another material slot. Let's create a new material, and let's call this cucumber. And let's give it some light green color like this. And select this face right here. And don't forget to select the actual material you want to assign and click assign. Let's click away. We can see this is now colored. And the last thing I want to do is the seaweed around the sushi piece. And we'll need to do another selection for that. And as you remember, you can select loops by alt clicking on some particular loop, and then by alt and holding shift, you can add more loops to your selection like this. So let's add those loops right here, and you can click here to add this inner loop as well. Let's create a new material slot. Let's call this seaweed. Let's give it some darker green color like this. Okay, and let's click assign. So now let's hit tab to exit the edit mode, and your sushi model is now complete with materials. To recap a little bit, you now know the viewport and how to navigate it, rotate around, zoom in and out and stuff like that. And we have explored the edit mode, how to make selections, and how to actually use tools from the toolbar on the left to make changes to your model, and then assign some colors using materials. And now it's time to explore the real power of Blender, and that's modifiers. So let's go to the modifier tab right here. That's the tool icon. And the goal here right now is to make 6 pieces out of this sushi. And there are of course multiple ways how you can do that. And the first most obvious would be to just duplicate it. And you can do that by right clicking and choosing duplicate objects. That will basically create a copy that you can move anywhere you want, and placing by a left click. And let me go back a little bit, because in this particular case, when you're creating this kind of stylized illustration with really strong geometry, you want these things to be placed evenly, and that would be really tedious to achieve with duplication. And the other option would be to use one of the modifiers we have at hand here. So let's go to the add modifier, and we'll search for array modifier, and that's the first one here under the generate column. So let's click array, and you will see our sushi piece got duplicated right there. And what modifiers really are, these are basically just procedural and non-destructive algorithms that make a change to your model without actually modifying the underlying mesh, the underlying object. The modifier leave that intact, so you can always go back and edit your original. And the array modifier basically takes the object and creates instances or copies of this object in a row that you can define. So let's go here and increase the count to 3. And if you hit tab and inspect, you can see we still have the original one model that we have created. So these other two are just result of this array modifier, but on the outside they act as a single object. And we want to create some kind of distance between them, and you can do that by increasing the offset. You can see there's a relative offset of 1. So let's increase this to something like 1.2. And what that will do, it will take one length of your sushi piece and then add 0.2 to that distance. and then creates another copy of the sushi piece. That's why there will be a 0.2 distance between those. And the great things about modifiers, you can stack them up over one another. So right now, if we want to create 6 pieces, we can just collapse this and click add modifier and add another array modifier like this. And what we need to do here is basically just switch the direction of the array. So let's set the factor x to 0 and y to 1.2 like before. And this way we have created 6 pieces that act as a single object when you select it. But if you go into the edit mode, that's still the same one object. And this is maybe a good time to stop for a while and talk about using transforms in the object mode and edit mode. So as you know, this is now object mode where you can select this object as a whole. You can move it around and transform and rotate using these tools. And if you go into the edit mode and select your whole object with A, you can see you can do the same basically here. So what's the difference between manipulating in the object mode and the edit mode? As you remember, when we wanted to scale this cube on the z-axis, we did it in the edit mode in the beginning. And that's because we were defining the shape of the object. And that's how I like to look at these things. So you will use the transforms, rotation, manipulation, and moving the object in the edit mode when you are defining the shape of the object. And on the other hand, you will use transforms in the object mode when you need to place your object in the context of your scene. So for example, if I would like to make this sushi piece a little bit higher, I would do that in the edit mode. I will select all and basically scale this on the z-axis like this. But on the other hand, if I'd like to just move it around and place it somewhere else in the scene, I would use object mode, press G, and place it somewhere in the scene and make it larger or smaller, depends on maybe the plate size or the table size or something like that. So let me go back a little bit. And this is a little bit of a pain point for beginners in Blender, the edit mode versus the object mode. That's why I thought it will be important to talk about this right here. And there are some other differences, but one other is really visible here when we added some modifiers. You can see this acts as a one single object, so when you rotate it, you are rotating the whole object with the result of the array modifier. On the other hand, if you go into the edit mode and rotate just your mesh, you are changing the objects, but you are changing its shape also and the proportions. So you can see even the distances between the sushi pieces will change if you make adjustments like this. So that's the differences between object mode and the edit mode, and we can now move on and create some plate for our sushi. So remember, if you want to change the shape of the object, how it really looks, you go into the edit mode. If you just want to change the position or rotation or scale of the object in relation with its environment, you will do that in the object mode preferably. We can now go ahead and create a plate, and first I want to hide the sushi so it doesn't get in the way, and we can do that for example here in the outline view. The outline view shows you the hierarchy of your whole project, and you can see all the objects, your camera and the light here, and you can use it for multiple tasks. For example, you can inspect your object and see what modifiers are there, what materials does it have assigned and stuff like that. And you can also rename your object. So let's do that right now, and let's double click the cube here and let's call this sushi. Let's press enter, and we have renamed the object. And it's really a good habit to name your objects while you're creating them, because when your scenes got bigger and larger and you have a lot of objects in place, it can get really messy and you will have all those like cubes, planes and circles and stuff like that in your scene. It will really get harder to navigate your outline view, so I recommend you name your objects. And right now we can hide this by using this eye icon, so let's click this and we have our empty scene again. And we'll start creating our plane by using another type of geometry, and that's plane. And to add a new object, you go to add and mesh and plane, or you can use a shortcut. You can press Shift A and you have the same selection of objects here, And let's add a plane right here. If you have less options here, don't worry about this. That's due some add-ons I've enabled and stuff like that, but you should be able to locate plane. And now just click this and it will add a plane. Plane is a very simple object. It basically consists only of 4 vertices. So when I tab in and choose the select box and go to the vertex select mode, you will see there are only 4 vertices here. So it's a planar object. This is not really a 3D object, basically it's just one face. And when creating a new object or modeling something, I always start with the primitive object that's closest to a shape of the object that I want to create. So if it's something circular, I would go for a circle or a cylinder. If it's something boxy, you would go for a cube. And if it's something flat, you might go and create a plane and extrude your object from this, and that's what we are going to do right here. So first of all, while in the edit mode, let's press A to select all, and we'll scale this up. So press S, and as you can remember, we can chain commands, and not only you can specify the axis you want to do your operation on, you can specify the numerical values for your operation. So let's enter 4. And that will scale our object 4 times, and we are still in this interactive mode. And now just press enter to confirm, or left click, whatever works for you. So this will serve as a base for our plate, and now we can just extrude it up a little bit. So let's press E and extrude it up like this. And now I want to show you a new tool. You already know the extrude tool, and now there's another one that's called inset faces. So let's click that one. And you will see there's a gizmo there. You can drag to activate the tool. But again, I will use a shortcut here. So you can try both variants and see what works best for you. So I will go back to the select box and just press I for inset. And that will again enable this interactive mode. And we can further specify what we need to do. But right now, I just want to inset this like that and click with the left mouse button to confirm. And the difference between insetting and chopping up your geometry by using subdivision, as we did before, is that we are able to create this kind of geometry inside the face without adding like corner faces. So right now we can just extrude it once again and extrude it down. So let's press E and extrude down like this. Be careful that you don't go over the bottom face there. So just extrude this something like that. And you have now your plate. And now if we tab out of the edit mode, so let's press tab, we can add a material here as well. So let's go to the material tab. Let's create a new material. Let's call this plate. And let's click the color and give it some dark color like this. Not black all the way, but go somewhere here maybe with the value. Okay, so that's your plate. And right now we can unhide the sushi, so you can just click the eye icon here, or if you want to unhide all of your objects that you have hidden in the scene, you can just press Alt H and it will unhide them. And now we can go ahead and place our sushi on the plate. And as I mentioned before, we are accommodating the sushi piece object to its environment, so we will do this in the object mode. So let's select the sushi, and right now we need to go to the top view. So we better see the placement, and you can do that either by clicking on the Z here on the gizmo, or you can use the numpad for camera navigation. And the top view is number 7 on the numpad, like this. Or there's a third option. If you don't have a numpad, you're working on a laptop or something, but you want quicker access than the gizmo right here, you can use that tilde key that I've shown you before. If you hold it, you will see this pie menu and you can choose top from the list. So just pick one that serves you the best. And now we can place the sushi, but right now we don't see the boundaries of that plate inset. And to better see it, we'll switch this to the wireframe view. So just click here to switch to the wireframe view. And now it's much better. So let's just press S to scale and scale this down a little bit, so it's something similar. And you can either use these gizmos or use the shortcuts that I use right here. So it's S for scale, and now you can use G for grab or to move. And now just grab this and place it in the middle. And we can scale this even more like this and place it here in the middle. And now let's look from the side, and either you click the X or Y axis or use 1 or 3 on a numpad. So let's press 1, so we look from the front, and now we'll press G, then Z to lock this on a Z axis and place it right here. And if you think the plate is too thick, which it is in my opinion, we can select the plate. Let's go into the edit mode by pressing tab, and while in the wireframe mode we are able to select all of the vertices, even those we don't see behind. So we can just use the box selection around all of these vertices right there and press G, then Z, and move them down. So we are defining shape, that's why we are in the edit mode, and it's really easy to manipulate the individual pieces of the geometry, like selecting all of these vertices and moving them down. So let's tab out, and now we'll select the sushi and just place it on the plate again. So let's press G, then Z, and place it like this. Now let's switch back to the material preview, and we can rotate with the middle mouse button, and here's your sushi plate. Now it's time to move on to chopsticks, and you might notice that when we created a new object, it was created in the center of the scene, but it's not always like that, and it's always placed on the cursor. But I don't mean the mouse cursor, I mean this gizmo right here, the crosshair with the red and white circle. And you can of course move this cursor when you need to create objects somewhere else, and you can use that by using the cursor tool right here and clicking anywhere to move it. But this is a little bit tedious, and there's of course a faster way to do that. So let me switch back to the box select, and if you hold shift and right click, you will move the cursor to a new place. So shift right click anywhere and you will move it. And right now I want to create the chopsticks on the side of the plate right here. So let's shift right click somewhere here to place the chopsticks. But be careful right now how you got your scene rotated. We want the chopsticks on the left side from the camera view, and the camera is right here. So be sure you are looking on your plate from this side. And after you placed your cursor, let's just press Shift A, go to Mesh and add a cube. And now we'll need to change this cube so it has a chopstick shape. And to define the shape of the object, we'll use the edit mode as I said before. So let's tab into the edit mode, and let's enable the scale tool. So press S on a keyboard to enter this interactive mode. And as I mentioned before, you can specify the axis and enter numerical values. Here you can chain your commands to control your scaling, but you can also exclude the axis. Normally, if you want to scale on the x-axis, you would press X and it will lock on the x-axis. But if you want to exclude that, you press Shift X, and that will basically enable Y and Z axis for the scaling. And right now, if you go down, you can see it stays the same on the X, but only resizes on the Y and Z axis like this. So let's find some scale that will look great. I think something like this. Okay, let's confirm with the left click. We'll continue the scaling, so it's a little bit longer. So press S and then X, and we'll just scale it out like this. Okay, so that'll be our chopstick. And now we can tab out and place it better on the table. And you can see how I tab out when I need to move the object depending on its surroundings, that I didn't move it in the edit mode up, but I tab out and then move it up. Let's go to the front view again, and you can press 1 on a numpad or use gizmo on the corner, and let's enable the wireframe again. You don't need to click these icons right here. If you hold Z on a keyboard, you will get the Pine menu for your view modes, and you might not see the toggle overlays and toggle X-ray right here because that's an extra feature enabled in the preferences, but you should have these 4 here. So let's select the wireframe and just release. And now let's zoom in a little bit with the mouse wheel and press G and place this on the plate and maybe center it out a little bit better like that. Let's now hold Z again and switch to the material preview, and let's rotate the scene. We want to have 2 chopsticks here, and the array modifier would of course be overkill for just 1 additional object. So we can duplicate this, and you saw before, if you right click, you have the duplicate option here, but there are 2 duplicate options. One of them is duplicate objects and the other one is duplicate linked. I want to use linked and I will explain the differences. If you just duplicate objects like this, you basically created a copy of the original one that's separate. You can edit and change this object. It will not affect the original one in any way. So let me delete this. I will press X and click delete. Select this chopsticks once again and let's use the other option. So right click and choose duplicate linked and you will enter this duplication mode. And remember, you can chain command. So now if you press Y, you will lock that movement on the y-axis and let's move it here like this. And this is now a linked duplicate that's tied to its original copy. Any changes you will do inside it will apply to the original one as well and vice versa. So the objects in Blender are basically like containers that have this additional data like materials, modifiers and stuff like that. Actual shape of your model is data as well. When you create a linked duplicate, you create a new container, but it has the same data as the original one inside, if it makes sense. And here another difference of editing in the edit mode and object mode can be visible. If you now scale this new container, you can scale it no problem and it will be larger than the original one. Let's go back. But if you go into the edit mode and scale the mesh, you will see they scale at once. Basically only this part, the actual mesh part inside the object, is linked to the original one, not the container itself. And this is really useful when you just create one model, distribute it around your scene, and then if you make a change, it will get applied to all of them, and the same applies to materials. So let's now create a new material for the chopstick. Let's call this chopsticks. And let's give it some kind of woodish material, something like this maybe. And you can see how this is applied to the other one as well. So very useful feature. And let's now tidy up the scene a little bit better. We named the sushi already, but let's rename the plate and the chopsticks as well. And you can see when you give the same name to some object, Blender will automatically append a number there, so you can differentiate between these different objects. So let's now move on and set up a camera and our background. We already have a camera in our view, it's this one, so we only need to set it up for isometric or orthographic view. So first of all, let's look from the camera, and there's this little icon here you can click to enable camera view, or you can use this tilde menu to choose view camera, or you can use the numpad 0. That's what I use the most, so I will now press numpad 0 to go to the camera view. And now you can see this camera is in perspective mode. All the things that are closer to the camera are larger, and then the further away you are from camera, the smaller the objects get. That's the perspective. We need to go ahead to the camera settings, and first we need to select it. So the easiest way to do that probably is here in the outliner view. So just click the camera, and right here you will see the settings for the object data properties change to the camera icon, so you can adjust your camera right here. And this is the place where you will switch it from perspective to orthographic. So let's do that, and right away you can see how this looks different. An orthographic view is unrealistic setting. It's mathematical projection used in geometry. You can see all the lines are perpendicular and there is no skewing or perspective distortion and stuff like that. And right now we can go to the output tab right here. That's the place where you set how you want your image to be processed and saved. And here we'll change resolution to something with a 4:3 ratio. That's like a standard digital photography ratio, and I use it most often for like portfolio shots and stuff like that. If you want to go more into the movie VFX, you'll probably work more with 1080 resolution like this, but for now let's switch this to 1600 to 1200. And we need to move the camera away from our scene, but moving the actual camera would actually do nothing here because we switched to the orthographic view and the distance of the camera doesn't really matter. So to be able to change this, we need to go back to the camera settings and switch orthographic scale. So let's click and drag this property here to zoom out like this, maybe a little bit more. Let's enter something like 13. And additionally, you can press G then Z to move the camera up, so you better center this in the middle. So that's the isometric camera setup, and we use the default camera that's created with every scene when you start a Blender, and just switched it to the orthographic projection and adjusted the orthographic scale. The only thing left to do is to add some background. So let's create it in the middle of the scene. We need to reset the cursor here. So let's hold Shift S. That's the snapping shortcut. You can find multiple snap options here, but right now we are interested in cursor to world origin. Let's click that one, and this will reset the cursor to the middle of the scene. And right now we can press Shift A and add a plane, and we only need to scale it up. We don't need to go into the edit mode right now, just press S, scale it up so it goes outside these bounds of the camera. Let's call this background, so double click in the outliner view, let's call this BG. Switch here to the material tab, create a new material, let's call this background as well. And now let's just set some color, and I prefer some vibrant blue color, something like this. And we can cross-reference with our render, and I think this is something similar, so I will leave it like this. And the one last step here is to set up the lighting and render out our image. And lighting is probably the most important step of your artwork. It doesn't matter how well you modeled your object, how well you prepared your scene. The lighting in the end can make or break your scene. So I really recommend to give more time and thought to your lighting, to play with it around a little bit every time, and don't rush the final step, because when you put all of that work into your modeling, you want to get most out of it with beautiful lighting. And right now we are in the material preview, but we are using the default lighting that this mode offers. And if you want to see your scene in the real light, you will need to expand this little menu here. And here you can see you can switch through multiple lighting modes, but these are only for the preview purposes. These won't affect your final render whatsoever. If you want to see your actual lighting, you'll need to enable scene lights and scene world for your scene. And now you get actual results from your world lighting and from your light. And there's actually one point light here in the scene. And if we go to the world properties, you can see there's a background color like this. If you move that, you can adjust your world lighting. So these are these two options. The lights you have in your scene and your scene world, you need to enable them in your material preview to actually see how your materials behave in this lighting. So right now we can delete this point light. Let's just click it and press X and click to delete. You will see that the scene goes dark. Let's zoom in a little bit. And now we'll add a new light. Let's press Shift A, go down to the light and choose sunlight. And right away you can see the difference between sunlight and other types of light. The sunlight is directional. It really doesn't matter where it's placed, only the angle matters. So it doesn't have any fall off if you place it far away from your scene or close. It's a constant light. So the only thing we need to do right now is to rotate the light. And let's go to the wireframe view so we better see the placement of our light. We can see we have camera from this direction, and I want the light to be shining from this area right here. Let's rotate it on the x-axis first. So let's press R, then X, and let's enter 45 on the keyboard and enter. This will rotate our light 45 degrees. We are again using that chaining of the command when you enable some transformation, in this case rotation, and then specify the axis and amount. And now we'll do that once again. So press R, Z, and let's enter 45 degrees again, but let's additionally press minus so it goes to the opposite direction and enter. So now if we rotate this, we can see from top view we have the rotation we wanted. So let's go back to the camera view by pressing 0 on a numpad, and let's switch back to the material preview right there. And here you can see the angle of that light reflected on these shadows here. So let's go ahead and go to the object data properties while the sunlight is selected, and we'll modify the properties of this light. First of all, I want to give it more strength, so let's try something like 3. I think that works just fine. But for this kind of illustration, I don't like these soft shadows. I really want sharp shadows there, and we can modify the angle. Basically, the rule of thumb is the lower the angle is, the sharper the shadows will be, and vice versa. So if you add angle, you will see that it will create these really soft dispersed shadows, and if you go to the other side, you get these sharp shadows. Let's set this to 0 degrees. And we are now ready for the final render. And to see what that will look like, we can go to the render preview, and that's the last mode we didn't explore right here. Let's go to the render view, but you might see nothing changed actually. And if you go to the render tab right there, you will see our render engine is now set to the Eevee. And that's the same engine that the material preview uses. And by enabling scene light and scene world in the previous step, we basically make these two modes identical, because if you would disable these in the material preview, you will see now the only difference between those are those lights. But I like to enable the scene lights and scene world in the material preview because I like to have this render preview switched to the cycles. So what cycles and Eevee? Eevee is the render engine basically made for real-time graphics. It's a similar engine that the games use. The shadows aren't exact. There might be some artifacts here and there, but it's fast, it's real time. If you change something, it's happening in the viewport right there. It's very fast for rendering out animations and stuff like that. On the other hand, you have the Cycles engine, and let's switch to that right now. And that's basically the ray tracing engine, or path tracing in this case. It kind of simulates how the light goes from the light source and bounces off the surfaces and between the objects. This creates realistic shadows, realistic reflections, lights, and all that stuff. And the cost is obviously the speed. The path tracing is much more slower. Most of the time it can take several minutes to render out one single frame, so as you can imagine, it's really time consuming, for example, for animations and stuff like that. But I like to use the cycles for my final illustration output, since we are rendering just one image and we want the best quality we can get. And there are some settings that you can adjust here. First of all, right now we have this set to the CPU. And if you have a 3D graphics card from AMD or NVIDIA, you can enable GPU acceleration, of course. You can just go to the Edit, Preferences, switch to the System. And right here you will see the Cycles render devices, and you can switch this to None, or CUDA if you have NVIDIA card, or Optics if you have NVIDIA card with RTX ray tracing, and then you have the OpenCL option for AMD cards like Radeon. So I will switch this to Optics since I'm using RTX card. If you have GTX, you can switch this to CUDA, and just close this window, and right now you are ready to switch this to GPU compute. If you would just switch this without setting the properties, it would still render with CPU. And vice versa, if you set it to preferences, you need to set it here as well. So always remember to set all those two properties. And now we are in the render preview mode. This is GPU preview with the ray tracing, and you can see these little dots rendering here, and that's basically your ray tracing real time, doing these samples over and over and over, doing more and more of these light bounces until you get a better result. But you can never really get rid of the noise. That's where the denoising technology comes into place. So let's go back to the camera view, and before we move on, there is one important thing, and that's render samples value. This is something that probably most affects your render. It's how many times you want the light to bounce and redraw your image. And you want to set this to something higher, but not too high, so it doesn't render like 1 or 2 hours. I would recommend something between 256 to 512. Of course, you can help yourself by enabling adaptive sampling. And then you can move on and expand this denoising section. This is a new thing since Blender 2.9. It all moved here in the render settings. You don't need to go and look for your denoising. It's right here, and you have two options here. One of them is render, one of them is viewport. Since Blender 2.83, you can render in the viewport as well, but you can use GPU acceleration only if you have optics with the RTX NVIDIA card. That's my case here, so I will check the viewport right here and switch this to optics. You can try open image denoise for the preview denoising, but it can be slow depending on your CPU. So I will use optics right now, and right here you can see what that does. It still does these samples, but at the same time the tensor cores on the graphics card are using the AI neural network to denoise your scene, and it's almost instant. I really recommend a good NVIDIA card for this, and unfortunately at the time of this recording there's no other way to get this kind of a viewport denoising performance other than owning the RTX NVIDIA card. And one last step, you want to check the render denoising as well. That's the denoising that will happen when you render out your final image, and you can switch this to open image denoise. It's the CPU denoising, but it has a really great quality output. I found myself preferring this over anything else here. I think it does the best denoising for the final render. So this is almost finished and we are ready to render. There's just one last step you can play with, and that's color management right here. And you can change the contrast look of your scene right here. You can switch multiple contrast modes. Sometimes it helps to really bring out more from the scene. Maybe you can switch this to medium high contrast, and you can play here with exposure as well. So if you think this is a little bit too dark, you can add up to something like 1 exposure, and you will really get this bright, vibrant result. I will leave it to medium high contrast and set the exposure to 1, and that's the final setting here. And let's have a look how this renders out. So I will switch this to material previews so we don't overload the computer with rendering as well as viewport preview. And now let's just hit F12 and see how this renders out. Okay, so this is the final render. Your Blender version might render this into the external window. This is a feature again that can be set up in the preferences. You will learn that down the road. So this is it for your Sushi 3D illustration. I want to congratulate you on your first 3D illustration. This is no small feat, even if it might look really simple to you. Basically, with the skill set you just acquired, there's no limit on what you can go and create using just this style. Just go ahead and explore some of the designs out there. I've just dragged up a few references that you can have a look at. You can see these are very similar boxy stylized designs, and you already have a skill to create something like this. You know, you learned your extrusion, insetting, subdividing your models, creating new objects, adding new primitives, and bashing multiple objects together. I would encourage you to go ahead and try to create something on your own. And most of the time I get a question on what's the next great step for you when you're learning something and you go through a lesson. I would really recommend to imagine something you really like, your favorite scene, either from a movie or a book or whatever you have basically, or if you like some particular animal, just take something you really like that you would enjoy creating. Go ahead and use the skill you just learned to create something on your own, and use the similar lighting and scene setup that we just did in this episode. Yeah, that's it. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in my future episodes.